Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matthew Lodge.
Hello, and thank you very much. Welcome to How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Public Cloud. Here's a message from our lawyers that will make them very happy. All right, let's get started. So, this is like IT in the 1950s. This is shipping. This ship is being loaded, or these ships are being loaded with what was called break bulk cargo at the time. If you wanted to ship anything, it was in barrels, it was in sacks, boxes, and packing a ship was an incredibly skilled, very time-consuming, incredibly manual task. You had to get the cargo inside of the ship. You had to make sure that it wasn't going to move when the ship was underway. You had to make sure the ship was balanced so it wouldn't capsize. And you also had to pack as much into the cargo hold as possible. Very skilled, very time-consuming process. Now I can imagine engineers thinking about how can we improve this process. Undoubtedly, some kind of automatic load balancing algorithm for cargo, right? It would probably use machine learning. But this essential challenge sounds like a lot of the IT challenges that I hear from you. When I go out and talk to customers and customers come to VMware, I hear about the same thing. Lots of complexity, manual processes, takes too long. And what happened to shipping really revolutionized the world as we know it today. In fact, we know the day that that revolution started. This is Ideal X. It's the first containerized shipping vessel, and it sailed from Newark, New Jersey to Houston, Texas on April 26, 1956. Now just think about this. Shipping had been the same for hundreds of years prior to this ship setting sail. And it carried cargo in containers, metal boxes. And that meant that the shippers could pack the containers themselves. They didn't have to have all of those people on the side of the dock packing the cargo onto the ships. They just completely skipped the entire process. They didn't optimize shipping. What they did is they transformed it, and they transformed it through standardization and through automation. It was now much easier to load a ship. It was a lot faster. You could just weigh all of the containers, and you could balance the ship that way because you knew how much every container weighed, and you could drop them onto the ship in the right place. And that could be completely automated with cranes, and it could be a very simple process. And you just didn't do all those things that made shipping slow and expensive. The other thing it did for shipping is it dramatically reduced theft. There was a huge amount of shrinkage, as they called it, of cargo getting stolen when it's going through all of those managed processes. So this really transformed shipping. It's not an exaggeration to say this really transformed life. Pretty much everything you know in modern life today is not possible without containerized shipping. That's how you've got your iPhone or your Android device in your pocket today. That's how it's possible to do that and have those manufactured in China and other places, Japan, and then shipped in containers to you for very, very low cost so that you can have the devices that you need. And there were big winners and big losers as a result. So the Port of San Francisco never installed container handling equipment. Everything stayed in break bulk. The Port of Oakland, sleepy little Oakland, it was a tiny port, adapted to containerized shipping. They installed cranes and container handling systems. And now, well, within 20 years, the Port of Oakland was in the second largest port in the United States. And today, it's in the top 4, and it's in the top 20 worldwide. Whereas San Francisco is a nice place to have lunch and home to a family of sea lions. So huge, huge difference for winners and losers. So standardizing and automation, this tectonic shift, this change, transformed containerized shipping. And the same is true for cloud and public cloud for IT. So what we're going to talk to you about in the session today is how you can standardize and automate and stop worrying and love public cloud. Before we get to that, and I invite Massimo up to the stage, we're going to just take a look at economically what does this mean. So if you think about what does this mean to your management chain, what does it mean to CFOs, what does it mean to CIOs, what does it mean to the C-suite? Well, economically, there's an enormous difference between the average IT organization and public cloud providers. Where does that come from? So these figures on the left-hand side have stayed the same really for the last 20 years. Gartner has been tracking IT spend and how it breaks down for the last 20 years, and it's looked like this. It hasn't really changed. A lot of that is due to labor. Why is that? Well, you all know you don't have standardization in your environments. You've got all these custom things. You've got this special application over in a corner that has its own infrastructure. The last thing you have in IT is standardization. But that is what public cloud providers are leveraging to get lower costs and better speed. When you look at the breakdown for public cloud providers, labor is a much smaller percentage of that. And it's a much smaller percentage because cloud providers ruthlessly standardize and automate. So we're going to talk about how you can take advantage of that. Huge difference, right? You can see that now hardware, power, cooling, data center space, much greater percentage of the overall costs at cloud providers. Very, very different. But that 20 to 30% difference can make a huge difference to your career and what you do. So we're going to tell you to stop worrying in 3 very specific ways. And first of all, we're going to tell you to stop worrying about private cloud, which might seem odd coming from somebody who works for VMware. I mean, how many times have you heard about private cloud from VMware? But our argument is that for many organizations, you can get 80% of the benefit of private cloud by focusing on automation rather than a full private cloud deployment. And you get immediate relevance improvement to your customers inside your organization. So we're going to talk about that in more detail. Second thing, we're going to tell you to stop worrying about security in public cloud. We don't mean that in a reckless way. What we mean is thinking about security in a less emotional way. You've probably heard about security in the public cloud, and it's all worrying, and we're going to talk about that in some detail. And we're going to talk about what does security really mean, and how can you be sure that you actually have the security that you need? How do you get onto the definition of what secure really means so that you can be secure and agile? And then finally, we're going to tell you to stop worrying about cost reduction, which is kind of odd because VMware has been helping you all with cost reduction for the last 15 years. Right? We've saved, or you've saved, using VMware technology, billions of dollars. But you can't save your way to greatness. And there's a big difference in that your organizations don't really want cost savings from you. What they really want is for you to help them become more relevant and go faster. Launch new products and services, enter new marketplaces. Do that much, much faster. So you want to focus on business value. Business value sounds kind of like one of those fluffy phrases, right? We're going to talk about very specifically what does that mean? How can you do that? So let's start talking about private cloud. So why should you stop worrying about private cloud? First of all, because it's really, really difficult. So on this chart here, we put together all of the different components that you would need for a full-on, fully automated private cloud. And you can see all the various different technologies there. Let's just take entitlement tracking. It's very boring, very necessary function. Now, let's imagine that you really killed it in entitlement tracking. You were the best at entitlement tracking. Would the rest of your organization really notice that? Is the CIO going to be coming to your office and clapping you on the back for such a fantastic job that you've done in entitlement tracking? No. There are so many things on this chart that deliver more value to the rest of your organization. And we're going to say that deployment automation and automation of applications in general is where 80% of the value is. That's our contention. You can get 80% of the value from 20% of the work. So what I'm going to do now is ask Massimo Refere to come up on stage, and he's going to talk you through in detail, what does that mean exactly? How would you do this? Thanks, Massimo.
Thanks, Matthew. Hi, guys. My name is Massimo Refere. I'm a cloud architect in the Cloud Services Business Unit. And what I would like to show you in the next few slides, roughly 10 minutes, is what Matthew was alluding to, right? So that 80-20 concept. And this is a side project that I've been working on for, a few days back a few months ago, where I was trying to, mimic what an IT person, right, the traditional vSphere administrator, would be able to do when facing those typical questions from internal users, right? So the traditional developers that would like to have a VM very quickly, right? And in this particular case, I was talking to this guy that I've known for a while, and he was, talking about this use case where a developer was approaching him for not only a VM very quickly, right? Usually I need it yesterday, but that VM needed to be internet connected, right? Because the use case in that case was that guy was doing some work with a partner, with an external partner, so they needed to get that VM and work together on that VM, right? So I sat down and we have been brainstorming a little bit, and essentially we came up with, with this very basic idea, right? So you're the vSphere admin of your on-prem infrastructure, right? And what you could do in the context of what Matthew was talking about, which is standardization and particularly automation, is you could use tools that you have at your disposal for free, right? Like VCO, for example, right? And by using VCO, which is a tool that you get for free out of your on-prem vSphere installation. So we're not talking about, a private cloud project that requires, millions of investment, 6 to 12 months, and a couple of VPs backing the project, right? We're talking about, being able to deliver value, as Matthew was alluding to, right, in a very easy way, right? So subscribing to vCloud Air, right, and leveraging the technology that you have available today, like VCO and the plugins to connect to vCloud Air, we came up with this idea of, get the requirement from your internal user, right, which is, hey, can I have a VM, right, very quickly, right? That means yesterday, right? And by using the tools that I've just alluded to, the vSphere admin, will be able to deploy that VM in an automated fashion, as we will see in a matter of seconds, configuring the proper NAT rules and firewall rules on the edge gateway backing your virtual data center, and actually sending an email back to the user, to the developer, right, that the VM was ready, right? So that is the visual, the diagram and the idea. In practice, what this means is, no more than 4-6 hour works, right? So, and at the end, the developer is able to RDP and SSH from the internet, right? So this would represent both the developer or the partner that needs to work with the developer into that VM. So what this means in very practice is a very simple VCO workflow, and again, VCO, you get it for free as part of vSphere, right? That does exactly that. So it instantiates the vApp, right? It set the proper rules and NAT rules for that vApp, right? And then send a notification to the user, right? So what happens here is that the vSphere admin get the call from the developer. So we're not talking about a portal or any magic here, right? So we understand that this is very basic, but this is part of that 80-20%, 20% that Matthew was alluding to, right? 80% of the value for 20%, probably less in this example of the effort, right? So the vSphere admin gets a call from the developer that says, well, I need a VM yesterday, and then I need it to be internet connected, right? So it runs from the vSphere web client. It runs that workflow because VCO is integrated inside the vSphere web client. It runs that workflow. The vSphere admin will put no more than 4 parameters, right? The template that he needs to deploy in the public cloud, and the local and remote ports that he needs to configure the NAT and firewall rules on the edge gateway, right? And last but not least, it will configure the email address of the developer of the internal customer, right? So when this runs, and you can see the workflow running inside the vSphere web client, the developer, after a few minutes, probably a couple of minutes, will get an email that says, your VM is ready. That's the internet IP address and the port that you need to use to SSH or RDP into it, right? And the developer will open an RDP client or SSH client, whatever it needs, and it will connect to its desktop in a matter of few minutes, right? So this is about, creating, the business value that Matthew was alluding to, rather than a private cloud project that may take forever. And I've seen personally, years spent on private cloud project, millions of dollars spent on private cloud project where success was, I can deploy a VM. That is true, right? So 2 points that I want to come across with this one. Automation. This is not the greatest example to discuss how you can reduce the time that it will take you to deploy something, because this is a basic VM. But imagine augmenting this example with real application or stuff like that, right? That you can augment with Application Director or VCAC on top of VCO, right? You're going to save a lot of time. First point. Second point that I would like to point out with this example is the characteristic of the VM that needs to be internet connected. Very important, right? And very common these days, right? Because of the collaboration that needs to happen with people outside of your organization. How long will it take you to provision a VM to an internal user that is internet connected? 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, right? And a lot of work that was the part that Matthew was showing in the slide that is going to cost your organization the most, right? Labor, right? The overhead that you get inside your organization to get all of these things done. By combining the advantage of the automation piece that we have just seen with the fact that the vCloud Air, you can provide out of the box a VM that is internet connected, you get the advantage of both worlds. Right? And the last point that I was trying to make on this is that what other option does this guy have, right? So the two options that these guys have, the developer, is either wait 6 weeks for IT to provision a VM that is internet connected, or go to AWS, right? And guess what he's going to do if you don't start doing things like this. And going back to what Pat said this morning, becoming a little bit more brave, right, in how you serve your internal users and challenge the status quo in a way. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you. Right, second thing, stop worrying about public cloud security. So what do we mean by that? So what we mean very specifically is that your data center does not have magical protection. I know I have met people who believe that because they own or lease the 4 walls of their data center, that it is like the Hogwarts school of witchcraft and wizardry, in that it gets magical protections from all the bad guys on the outside. The only thing owning your data center gets you is physical access. That's the big difference between your own data center and public cloud, which is a data center run by someone else. What we see is that when we look at all of these breaches, we're seeing that owning the 4 walls is not helping. 90% of all companies have at least 1 data breach a year, according to the Ponemon Institute, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. The bad guys don't really care if you own the walls. They're still trying to do their bad things. The threat landscape is identical for public cloud and for your own data center. It's the same bad guys trying to get at your stuff. They really don't care where it is. So your data center is a lot more like the Lego Hogwarts, in the sense that you're building it up from different blocks and there are gaps in between. So the trick is really to understand what really is security about. And this is a way to sort of get through a lot of the challenges associated with public cloud security. Because there are really only 3 questions. First thing is, do you have the right physical and logical controls? Right, these questions are the same regardless of whether we're talking about public cloud data center or whether we're talking about your own data center. So am I doing the right things? Do I have the right controls in place to stop the bad guys? Physical controls are things like 8-foot walls, like having a man trap on the entrance, using two-factor authentication. Right? And logical controls, things like firewalls and IPS and IDS and all those other items. So if I've got the right controls, the next thing I have to worry about is, are those controls actually in place? Are they being used appropriately? So am I doing the things right? Are they in place? And are they functioning correctly? And then the third point is, can you demonstrate that? Prove it to me. How do you prove it? Things like penetration tests, audits. You want to make sure that all those controls are in place and you can verify the fact. And if you can do these three things, that is the definition of security. And this is a great way to be able to talk to security teams, particularly when there's a lot of scaremongering. Right? This is a very logical way to do that. What's the right set of security controls? You can have a conversation about that. Which controls should we have? Right? And there are companies out there that can help you determine that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about standards here in a second, another way to help you do that. Second thing is, what's your audit approach? How do you verify? How do you do tests? Right? And then the third thing is, how do you get outside external third parties to help you do that audit, do that penetration test? Some of the security standards can help you out with this. So ISO 27001 is more of a process standard. It's a way about how you do things. So the organization has to document its processes and procedures associated with security and securing the service. Second one is the SOC 1, SOC 2, those various different standards. These are about the set of controls. So these are control sets, things that will give you security. And you can take a look at these, and this can form the basis of your particular security control set. You might need different controls, you might need more controls, but this is a good way to get started, and it's a good way to have a conversation with security teams about what it is you really need. And then in the healthcare industry in the US, you've got HIPAA and high-tech. And HIPAA is a set of security controls. It's also a contractual agreement. There's a thing called a business associates agreement, which is a contract between you and your cloud provider about how you're going to do things like respond to breach notifications. Right? So it's a combination of a control set and also a set of processes and procedures. And then high-tech is a way to audit against that. So if you come to VMware and you say you want to see the results of our high-tech security audit, we can share that with you so they get that transparency for what you need for your security folks. But this is a way to get through the worries about security and get onto a factual basis and a factual footing. Now, of course, there's a lot more to this, and I'm not really going to do this topic justice in just a few minutes in this presentation, but hopefully this is a good framework for you to start thinking about it. And then to go more in depth, I'm going to have Massimo talk to you about network security, because that's a key component of what you do today, and it's a key way that you do security and you do isolation for applications. So we're going to talk about that in the context of public cloud and how public cloud can help you get there faster.
Thanks, Matthew. So I recognize a few faces that were in my previous session at 11 this morning, so I apologize. This is a repeated slide that I usually often, right? So the taxonomy of a physical data center, right? And when I show this slide, and particularly in the past where people were not using virtualization and VMware technology, they were usually like, yeah, that's how I look like. That's my data center, right? So most people laugh, right, at this, but at the end of the day, when you go a little bit deeper into this picture, you recognize that that's how, most of the organization used to work, right? And some of them still work in this way, right? So you have computer storage capacity, you have network equipment, right? And you have internet connectivity, right? So that is kind of the way that most data centers are laid out today, right? So what we have done with the vCloud Air service is essentially we took this operational model, right? Because good or bad, this is how customers are using the technology today. And what we have, and by the way, there is you and me managing the thing. But what we have done is essentially we have created this notion of a virtual data center, right? So this notion of a virtual data center that is the atomic unit that you use to consume the service is what's at the other end of your on-prem infrastructure. So you have your on-prem infrastructure, and inside vCloud Air, depending on the SKU that you are going to subscribe to, which I'm not going to cover in this session, is going to be a virtual data center, right? That is the extension of your on-prem infrastructure. The way you secure and connect the two is through either an IPsec VPN that we provide out of the box. So what's fronting that virtual data center is an edge gateway that allows you to configure it as an endpoint for the IPsec VPN connection, or second option is what we call direct connect. So it's a private circuit, right, that you configure with your own service provider that we make available inside that virtual data center, right? So that is what the picture is trying to point out. When you double click on that virtual data center, particularly from a networking and security perspective, this is what you are going to see, right? So that's the perimeter that Matthew was referring to, right? The perimeter of the virtual data center. And the edge gateway is the only way that goes in and out inside that perimeter in the virtual data center. Similar to what you do operationally when you are working with your on-prem data center. Inside the virtual data center, you can create, obviously, in self-service mode, a number of virtual networks. This is all SDN based, so all virtual VXLAN type of stuff, right? So you can create those virtual networks and let them isolated inside the virtual data center, so the attack surface is really minimum because it doesn't even connect to anything. Or you can connect them to the edge gateway, which is essentially the device that allows you to, as I said before, going in and out from the internet in this case, okay? The other point about this slide is that in order to make it even more transparent from how you operationally manage your infrastructure, if you are, for example, an F5 customer that is using F5 on-prem, nothing will limit you to make that edge device transparent and use a virtual instance of that same technology inside that virtual data center, right? So for example, F5 is the example that I was using here, but it could be pretty much any virtual instance of any other equipment, right? So that edge gateway, as you can see on the slide, is really the center point, the security center point that allows you to configure firewall rules, NAT rules, to provide additional services like DHCP to the internal network, and it's the IPsec VPN endpoint that allows you to extend your on-prem data center into the cloud. Once you have done that, right, that you have established this secure connection and this secure extension of your data center, this is when you can start thinking about hybrid applications, right? So an application that has multiple components, right, that they can live both on-prem and off-prem, right? And in this example, in particularly, we're taking SharePoint, right, where we show that you can have components of SharePoint deployed on-prem and other components of SharePoint deployed off-prem, right? So this is not something unique, right? Obviously, you can subscribe to other service provider and essentially have components on-prem and off-prem. But what is unique of this value proposition is that by virtue of the tools that we're using to make this a real hybrid instantiation of a on-prem and off-prem infrastructures, you can treat these essentially as a continuum of resources, right? So going back to the point that Matthew was making about security concerns, we want to get to a point where security is not a concern for the deployment, right? So there will be organizations that are going to be very paranoid about security, so a certain set of workloads will need to stay on-prem, and we know that very well, and we're happy about that because we play essentially in the same or in both world. But really the objective here is that the policy that we want customers to use is not we want to deploy this workload here because it's secure and not there because it's insecure. There are maybe other policies, right? So latency or cost or whatever that will determine whether a workload goes on-prem or off-prem, but we want to get security out of the way. This is just a visual that I'm using to give you more insights about how this connectivity works. I'm picking load balancing as an example here, but the same principle would apply to NAT rules or firewall rules. I just want to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So on the right-hand side, what you see is your on-prem infrastructure, right? So you have an on-prem network, 192.168.0, right, connected to a VPN device that is connected to the internet, obviously. And on the other side, you have a vCloud Air virtual data center that is backed by that edge gateway that has a faked internet IP address of 2.2.2.2. Obviously, that represents a real internet IP address. And those are a couple of internal routed networks that has VMs on them. In particularly, the green one, the front-end network, has a couple of VMs that we want to configure as a pool, right? So that is the web service, that is our pool where we want to load balance, let's say, port 80, for example. So what we can do here is a couple of use cases, right? So getting access to that pool of resources, that web service, from the internal network or from the internet. Right? So if you are in a situation like this, the first thing that you can do is to create that L3 IPsec connectivity from the on-prem network all the way to the green network inside the vCloud Air virtual data center, right? So that now that communication is secure, right? At that point, what you can do is you can configure the edge gateway to create a VIP, right? A virtual IP address that is going to load balance between those two so that your on-prem clients, right, that are on the 192.168 network can point to that VIP and being load balanced between those two. So that is what the edge gateway can allow you to do. The other use case, so this use case is from the corp network. There is another use case that the edge gateway support, which is connecting to the same pool from the outside, right, from the internet. At that point, what you can do is you can configure the edge gateway to do port mapping, essentially, and load balance that port on the address, the faked address 2.2.2.2 to the web service in the backend. The point that I'm trying to make with this one is hopefully it doesn't sound like something, you know, very different from what you do today, which is the whole point that we're trying to make here, right? So from an operational perspective, security, network and security inside vCloud Air is treated pretty much like you do today, right? So it's a device that happens to be a virtual appliance rather than a physical device where you right-click, and you configure services that the device is able to deliver, right? For example, load balancing, NAT, firewall, and these sort of things. It is exactly the same thing.
Great. Thanks, Massimo. All right, so let's talk about cost reduction. So I'm going to talk about two examples, give two customer examples of folks who adopted hybrid cloud, and it wasn't about cost reduction. So Seven Corners is an insurance company, so travel, medical insurance. Their objective in adopting cloud was to reduce claims processing time, and they went from 30 minutes to 15 seconds. Now, They're able to avoid $900,000 of cost as well. So that was hardware that they didn't buy. But the thing that really made that IT team incredibly successful was that claims reduction time. Right? That is what is important to the rest of the organization. How do you go faster? Sega, game development company out of Japan originally, but all over the world, and a strong development team out of the UK. They went to hybrid cloud because it enabled them to develop games faster. Right? They can do more development and test in the cloud. They can actually test sooner, they can test more frequently, they can do scale tests, they can do functionality tests, and they can just use cloud capacity to augment what they currently do. And they could take external testing, they have testing studios that test games, and they could give them a complete environment for the game to test in the cloud just for the duration of the test process before release. And they cut game testing time by 17%. That's a big deal in the gaming industry. It's all about shipping on time or shipping early, right? The sooner you can ship, the more money you can make, particularly when you get to Christmas time, at the end of the year, the holidays. Very, very important to hit those ship dates. But also they got fewer bugs and happier customers. They didn't set out to do that. There was side effects. But it's a great example, right? This costs more. It cost them more to do this. They were using more resources, but they were producing a better result. Great examples of IT organizations demonstrating relevance to the rest of their organization. When we look at what customers are doing with vCloud Air, it really falls into these 5 buckets. Development and testing, the Sega is a really great example of that. Second one, extending existing applications. What we mean by that is organizations that treat vCloud Air as an extension of what they currently do. They think of it as another data center, except it's a virtual data center instead of a physical data center. So this might be somebody who, they just bought another company. They need to put 5,000 people on Exchange. They're on the other side of the world or the other side of the country. And so they can use vCloud Air as an extension. They can take their exact Exchange deployment today. They can drop in a cookie cut, an extension of that new Exchange server, extend their existing applications. Disaster recovery is another great example. I used Columbia Sportswear as the example here, but lots of companies using vCloud Air as a warm standby for their own data centers, particularly smaller organizations that don't really want to run DR data centers. Right? It's very difficult, very expensive to run those locations. Disaster recovery on vCloud Air, you can replicate your virtual machines up to vCloud Air, and then they're ready to go with a 15-minute to 24-hour recovery point objective. You determine what that is. So a great example of the utility of cloud for that. And then modernizing applications and next-generation applications. Modernization typically is something where you're building something new onto an existing system or group of systems. Good examples here. This is Harley-Davidson dealer systems. They're doing a point-of-sale application. So they started doing dev and test for that in the cloud, but now they're also looking at deployment for that because they can drop that application into their dealerships and they can put it into vCloud Air. It'll be physically closer to the dealerships than they are in their own data center. But the core of that system is their customer database, the ERP, everything around manufacturing, all of that running today inside their own data centers. So the connectivity and the security and the interconnectedness is very important. And then next generation applications, Nexon is a mobile gaming company. And so what they do is run mobile games in vCloud Air. It's a very unpredictable business. They don't really know whether a game is going to take off. It's difficult to predict demand. So the flexibility of cloud is good, but also very consistent performance. That's why they use vCloud Air. And we built a cloud that has very high performance. We blogged about that recently. That's why Nexon uses vCloud Air. So these are the 5 things. Hopefully, spark some ideas about how you might be able to get started yourselves. Now we're going to pick that data center extension. We're going to dig in a little bit more detail. We're going to have Massimo talk you through global expansion.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. So this use case was somewhat an eye-opener for me, right? So because the way I was thinking of this is, we open a data center here, let's go sell it here. Oh, by the way, I'm not in sales, but the idea is, you open a data center in that region, go sell it in that region. You open a data center in another region, go sell it in that region, right? And when we were talking about this Atlanta-based retailer, it was an eye-opener because, I mean, the reaction was to our value prop of, oh yeah, we have data center in the US. And the reaction was, well, I couldn't care less about data center in the US because I have my data centers, I'm okay with that, right? I don't need to extend my data center here locally because I have more than enough capacity, right? But I do have a need to have what I call compatible remote capacity in the UK because we have operations over there, right? We just opened an office over there. We don't know how this is going to be, so very unpredictable. But we need capacity over there. So do you have capacity over there? Right? So that was kind of an eye-opener because it opened up a lot of new, use cases that were possible, like the Exchange one that Matthew was referring to. And in this particular case was a need for local capacity in the UK because of performance reason, right? There may be other use cases where the need is for other reasons like compliance, but in this particular use case it was for performance, right? So what are the options that they had, right, when it comes to execute on that? So there are a couple of ways to solve this problem for them. So the first one is to subscribe or to consume capacity from a traditional public cloud provider, right, that usually have a data center across the world in Europe as well, right? So they would get the agility of using a public cloud provider, but what they would lose is essentially the operational efficiency they have achieved with their on-prem deployment. So they would need to relearn pretty much everything because the operational aspect of running VMs or instances in a non-vSphere environment, not vSphere environment, is totally different, right? So they would lose pretty much all of that know-how that they built throughout the years, and eventually they were going to build a wall, right, between the data center that they have in Atlanta and the capacity that they subscribe to in the UK, mostly like, dealing with two completely different stack. The second option that they had was to go and buy colo space with a local service provider in the UK and possibly put their own gears or get some vSphere up and running over there that they need to manage, right? So they would, in this case, get the advantage of having to deal with a remote island that they could manage like if it was local in the sense of the operational model that they can implement. But essentially, they were going to get into a model that was not very agile, because imagine if the remote operation was to, explode in terms of business, right? And they needed, 4x the capacity in a matter of 6 months or 8 months. They will still need to buy, in the CapEx sense, capacity to put in that remote data center, not to mention the management of the low-level infrastructure, right? So advantages and disadvantages for both, right? So what we have been discussing with them was option number 3, right? So why not getting the best of both worlds? Capacity that is fully compatible with what you have in-house, but it is delivered as a cloud service, right? So you don't get to worry about a broken disk in London, or, oh, I need to repatch this cable from server 1 to server 2 to this other switch and whatsoever, right? So operationally, the very same model, getting rid of the stuff that do not really bring business value, okay? And this is how the visual looks like, right? So this was the current situation, right? So vSphere on-prem in the Atlanta data center with templates that they use on a daily basis and that they maintain, that they continue to maintain. They regularly use the vSphere web UI, right, usually. And they also have VCOps to monitor the local infrastructure. And this is how they could expand seamlessly into vCloud Air. So from a networking perspective, the VPN connectivity that we have been talking about, right? So that thing that you see on the right-hand side is a virtual data center that is based on capacity that we have in the UK, right? So that VPN connectivity is between the Atlanta-based data center and the virtual data center in the UK. With the vSphere Web Client plugin, as well as with the VC Ops Management Pack, they can see the remote capacity as if it was local, right? So they can see from within the vSphere Web Client both local capacity, locally running VM, as well as the remote capacity. Last but not least, templates was an issue for them. They had a number of templates that they keep updating, obviously, right? So using vCloud Connector and the feature of vCloud Connector that allows to sync catalog between different endpoints, they could just point vCloud Connector to the local VM templates repository and tell them, replicate these content into the remote virtual data center in the UK. So when there was a new VM template that they needed to update on-prem, vCloud Connector would take that template and replicate seamlessly into the remote data center. And what follows here is a number of screenshots that, kind of suggest all of these use cases. So this is the vSphere Web Client where the user, I don't need to teach you this, but this is the vSphere Web Client. You point to a template, right-click, deploy from this template. Pretty easy, right? From the very same vSphere Web Client, this customer could see capacity that was in the UK, right? So this is by virtue of vSphere Web plugin for vCloud Air, which, by the way, ships out of the box with 5.5 update 1, so you get it, out of the box. If you also subscribe to vCloud Air, you can configure that plugin to point to with your credential to vCloud Air, and it will show you the capacity that you have available in the remote locations. This talks to the vCloud Connector thing that I was mentioning, right? So vCloud Connector, among other things, will allow you to point to the local repository, which is based on the vSphere in Atlanta, over there, point to the templates directory and say, replicate these, publish this catalog and replicate it into the remote location, which is the vCloud Air UK data center that I have catalog inside vCloud Connector, okay? Once you have done this, always inside the vSphere Web Client, you can locate the templates that you have replicated, and you can instantiate that template through the vSphere Web Client in the remote data center. If you notice on the slide, there is a catalog type, global or local. Global are the catalog items that we provide as a service provider. When they say local, it is your own template, right? So only you can see that template. And those templates are those that are coming from the syncing of vCloud Connector. This is just an example of the VPN configuration. So on the left-hand side, what you see, I'm not going obviously to describe this, but what you see on the left-hand side is the configuration panel of the device that you use on-prem. We support any device that can do IPsec VPN. On the right-hand side, what you see is the configuration panel for the edge gateway, in particularly for creating these IPsec VPN tunnel. That's it.
All right. So just to wrap up, I want to leave you with two thoughts. First one, think about the organizational journey. It's very different to be a service provider than to be somebody who manages technology, manages infrastructure. This is the Gartner view of what that organizational journey looks like, right? So moving from traditional IT, where you're a provider of service, to both a provider and a broker. So someone who manages your own infrastructure, but also acts as a service provider for the rest of the organization. And it's a very different skill set. Right, thinking about understanding what is it that the business really needs, what's most important to them, what's most valuable to them, rather than thinking about, okay, how do I manage this piece of storage or this network or some silo of infrastructure. Right? But it's incredibly rewarding So the second thing I want to leave you with is don't let this happen to you. So what I'm showing you here is the front page of a newspaper. This is the Dispatcher. This was the newspaper of the Longshoremen's Union. And as you can see, the strike has entered the 5th week. This is in 1971. This is July. And containers was the big issue. They were on strike because of containerization. Now, this strike went on to last for a year. Huge disruption to shipping in the United States. The only way you could get things in on the West Coast was up through Vancouver or down in Mexico. The union got just about everything that they asked for as part of this strike. Almost everything they asked for, they were given in the new contract. But in 5 years' time, they were irrelevant. So they won the battle and they lost the war. So the thought for you is, think about what is the battle that you want to fight? How are you going to win the war? How can you be more relevant to the rest of your organization? There are all these great opportunities to take public cloud technology. You don't have to worry about public cloud. You can take advantage of what it does. You can blend it with what you do today, and you can deliver a much better experience and much more value for your organizations. Thank you very much. All right, a couple of things. First of all, if you'd like to try this, you can try it for free as part of the beta, or beta, for on-demand. So that's the URL. You go there, enter your details. That puts you in the queue for the beta, and then over time, we're basically going to process the queue and add you to the service. So we'd love to see you test this out, and you can try it out for yourselves. Second thing, if you want to learn more in any depth, any of these sessions, and you want a free Dilbert Hybrid Cloud t-shirt, then please come to the following sessions. We've got one on development and test, extending existing applications, disaster recovery, modernizing applications, and creating next generation applications. So the last one there is, we'll give it part of that. You'll see how we built the VMworld mobile application, which at about 7 o'clock last night had already served 1 million API requests from you folks logging in and downloading that onto your phones. So go to these sessions, get a free t-shirt, learn more about hybrid cloud in depth. There's also hands-on labs. Same topics, getting started, disaster recovery, want a jumpstart for vSphere admins, networking security, management, and disaster recovery is in there twice, yes. All right, and then at the VMware booth, you can come and see all this. You can chat to our folks. And please fill out the survey on your mobile device with the VMworld application. Thank you very much.